Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Lunchtime Bible Study with me. We are going to continue the series, How to Read the Bible, a field guide for spotting Jesus in every book of the Bible. And today, we are talking about the book of Lamentations. Oh, boy, look at that. We got to move this one over here a little. Sorry about that. Lamentations is where we're up to today. What do you know about it? What do you know about the book of Lamentations? What happened in it? Anything else that you could name that could be potentially helpful to us? When did it happen is an interesting one. List as many facts as you can. All right, so what I'd like to do here is to lead with the theme of Lamentations, because it's a book, as you can tell in the name of it, it's a book about lament. And so there's a lot in here. So we want to, off the bat, lead with the theme, which is there's comfort in cataclysm. I read that earlier, and I thought, hey, I like the sound of it. But listen, Lamentations, it's a dark book in a lot of places, and everything is falling apart. And so cataclysm is not it's not putting it mildly, certainly at all. And the book is talking about some of the comfort within that. So let's check this out. A summary of Lamentations, super unique book of the Bible. I mean, really, truly one of a kind. Lamentations, we don't know who the author is. Maybe it's Jeremiah. We're not really sure on that. You can kind of maybe assume. There's 5 poems in the book of Lamentations, and they make up each chapter, 1 poem per chapter. And so this book is about the most horrendous catastrophe that fell upon the nation of Israel, which is the siege of Jerusalem. Now, it's a bad scene, the siege of Jerusalem, because they're taking a city, but there's more to it than that, because it's not only just what's happening physically, it's what's happening emotionally, it's what happens spiritually as well. They're watching as this invading army is taking their city, but also it's the promised land that they were giving. And so it's like really theologically all kinds of twisted knots, because it's like, God, I thought you cared. I thought you were after us. I thought you loved us, right? It's about the royal line. Hey, God, they just took our king off into captivity. And what about the temple, the priests, the worship systems, like this entire thing? I mean, it doesn't seem to make any sense at all. It's all of it is gone. And so there's lots of lament songs in the Bible. There's lots of protests going on here. And so this one, it falls along with many of those, where we see there's protests, they're processing all these emotions, and they're voicing confusion in God's character. Lament offers up this sacred dignity, right, of saying, listen, we can go to God with those offers, with those emotions of protest. We go to God not with complete, maybe clear answers in mind or polished prayers in mind. We go to God with our confusion and say, God, what is the deal? Sometimes we're in meetings and we don't have our thoughts all set together. And I was just in a meeting earlier today, and the call was just think about it out loud. What are you thinking about? And we just start talking, and the sentences and the structures, they don't always seem to make sense, but yet, I mean, that's where we are. We're offering those things up. So you see the design of Lamentations is alphabet poems, or an acrostic poem, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, the ordered is linear, which is interesting because what's happening in the city is anything except linear. I mean, everything is disordered, not ordered. It's falling apart. There's pain, confusion, there's grief, there's all of this stuff, all of this garbage heaping down all the time. And so you can tell that the author is intentionally using this ordered, structured system in order to deliver a message about disordered pain and grief and confusing things that just don't make sense in the world. All right, this is kind of important. These numbers here, each number represents the number of verses in each chapter. So chapter 1 is 22 verses, chapter 2 is 22, chapter 3 is 66 verses, because each one is going through the alphabet, A, B, C, D, except for the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. And then the third chapter, they go through the alphabet 3 times instead of just once. So that's why there's 3 times as many verses. Chapter 4 goes back to the usual. And then chapter 5 breaks the entire structure. And everything just kind of spins into chaos. But the author is like, no, I know that there's supposed to be an order yet. So there's 22 verses. but it doesn't follow the order, which is just kind of an interesting dynamic, super intentionally written. And chapter 5 is also much, much shorter than the other chapters, even though it's the same number of verses. All right, let's jump in. Let's see what's inside of each one of these chapters. Chapter 1 is you have this picture of Lady Zion. It's kind of meant to be Israel. She cries out and no one comes to help. They talk about the fall of Jerusalem, and you can only think about it as a funeral for a city. Grief works this way. If you know somebody who's grieving, or if you know somebody who's processing any kind of loss, it doesn't have to be the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of a job, a loss of a dream. Anytime, grief then sets in. And you can think about it almost like you have to let go of something. And that's so hard, especially when somebody loses something that's not a person, maybe loses something valuable to them, right? A keepsake that's gone, or they lose a job, or maybe they lose a project that they've been working on for a long time. And it's almost like instead of skirting over that, we can give it a little funeral and say goodbye to it to honor that grief process. Anyway, Lamentations 2 is the fall of Jerusalem. So we have, God's pictures of God's wrath against Jerusalem, but God's wrath, it isn't just anger coming out, like spoiling over, right? God's wrath. The picture of God's wrath is more concentrated than that. I mean, it's more careful than that. It's a picture more of justice. I like the word discipline. God's wrath coming on Jerusalem. It's sort of God saying, we've prophesied this for a long, long time, and now it's time. And now it's being called in. Now I'm going to deal with it, right? Now is time to be disciplined. Babylon is here, and they're coming for you. Lamentations 3, we have, you get this picture of the lonely one, or maybe the suffering one. It breaks the design pattern. Remember, instead of 22 verses, it's 66 verses, 3 times longer than the other ones. Borrowed all these laments, right? The person is just grasping for words. And in the Bible, I love how the author of Lamentations, probably Jeremiah, is like looking for other people's words to describe his own emotions in the process. I think that's so helpful. When you just don't know what to say, it's to borrow somebody else's words. Borrow the words from Lamentations. He borrows words from Job. He borrows words from the Psalms. He borrows words from the suffering servant portion in the book of Isaiah, right? And then also in Lamentations 3, we have hope. The literal only hope in the entire book of Lamentations that it comes at a very interesting placement in Lamentations 3, where we see in chapters 22 and 23, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. Now this, verse 22, you'll notice, this is when you would expect the chapter to end, because it's 22 verses. It's time for this chapter to be done. But the author continues with a first time in Lamentations, a verse 23, they're new every morning, great is your faithfulness. Very interesting placement. The part that he tacks on, and then he goes obviously on and fills that out much more, is to say they're new every morning. Compassions are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. God's judgment is in the hope we see from Lamentation, from this chapter. We see that God still cares. He cares enough to discipline them. And that is a hard thing to wrap their minds around, that God cares. He's never stopped caring. And even now we can see he's caring maybe more than they've ever cared before. And they're obviously uncomfortable with that. It certainly cares about their sin more than they cared about it. Lamentations 4. Just a devastating picture of what that siege on Jerusalem looked like. And you get 3 key images of that, where you got kind of a before and after, where we see before the siege, children used to laugh and play in the city streets, and now they're in those streets and they're just begging for food. The before and after, we see the wealthy in the city used to gather around and have festivals and have parties and have these lavish meals with good food. Now they can't find anything to eat. The royal people used to be fancy and do fancy things, the royal line, and everybody looked up to them, but now Now their anointed king has been captured by Babylon and has been taken away in captivity. It's just this devastating picture. And then Lamentations, the last chapter I called just grief in pieces. And it's unique because everyone had that alphabetical order, right? A, B, C, D, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet in Hebrew, right down the line. There was a structure, this chaos, but it all kind of held together. In Lamentations 5, it's like the author is just giving up completely and saying, I don't understand it at all. And there's no order, there's no rhyme, there's no reason. And it's just this list of grievances and this begging for God's mercy. Long list of those devastated, hey, God, don't forget these people and this group and that group. And I think it's kind of neat that there's this lament on behalf of others. It's clear, too, that in Lamentations, we don't suffer in silence. Like, that's not an option just to kind of keep it to ourselves. Lamentations is a book where we go to God, we bring that. Even if we don't have something thought out to say, we just go to God and just share what's on our heart. Just start talking, right? And it's God's job to make sense of the words that are coming out. We don't have to always make sense. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And that's kind of a cool picture. The ending of Lamentations is very paradoxical. It doesn't make any sense, right? Where we see, hey, number one, God is still our king. He's still on the throne. Yet, it seems like you're not our king. It seems like you've totally forgotten us and forsaken us. And the author kind of says, I guess one way to reconcile is, have you totally rejected us? And it's this open-ended question that's never resolved. And I love that why they do that, because that's very much like pain and grief. Those of you who have experienced pain and grief, you know there's often no resolution for it. What you lost, or especially who you lost, will not be made sense of again. They're not coming back. And it's just not tidy. There's no ribbon on it that you could tie it all up. The book itself reflects the process of our own pain and grief. You don't get over it. You just learn to live with it and live through it. Jesus, though, however, shows up in Lamentations, I think especially. I love that verse. If you're committing one verse to memory through each book of the Bible, it has to be Lamentations 3:22. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. Remember, his mercies are new every morning. Shirley said in the comment section, great is thy faithfulness. John reflects that perfectly in the New Testament. Instead of because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed, John says, because God so loved the world, we will not perish. And what's in between there is what makes sense of everything, is because God so loved the world, he made a way for us. He gave his one and only son, Jesus, so that we would have life and we would be saved and would not perish. There's also a comment here about pain and about grief and its inevitability in life. John 16:33 says, I've told you these things, Jesus writes, or Jesus tells us, that in me you may have peace. And that's his promise that he gives. In this world, you will have trouble. Isn't that the theme of Lamentations? In this world, you will have trouble. Jesus acknowledges it. He's talking to his disciples, but I think he's also talking to you and I, and he's saying, listen, you're going to have trouble. Grief and pain will come upon you. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. I'm with you. Even to the very end of the age, Jesus says. All right, we got some reflection questions here on the book of Lamentations. I'm going to try to leave those on the screen here for you for a little while. I'm so glad you stopped by to check out the midweek Bible study with me. We do this every week at noon, and we will see you next time, Wednesday at noon. Take care.